The evening sunlight cast a golden glow over the streets of Seattle, its rays filtering through the large windows of Viridian's Table, a fine dining establishment renowned for its ambiance and culinary excellence. Inside, the air was filled with the soft strains of jazz music mingling with the faint clatter of utensils and the low hum of polite conversation. The restaurant was alive with an elegant energy, as patrons in their finest attire enjoyed carefully plated dishes and attentive service. Amid this scene of refinement, Mrs. Claudine Carter entered, her presence quiet yet commanding. She was an elderly black woman, gracefully dressed in a tailored navy suit with a string of pearls that gleamed softly against her dark skin. Her silver-streaked hair was styled neatly, and her posture radiated dignity. Despite her unassuming nature, she exuded an aura that seemed to momentarily hush the room as the door softly clicked shut behind her. At the hostess stand, a young woman glanced up, her professional smile faltering ever so slightly before she recovered. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" she asked politely, her tone a touch cooler than it had been with previous guests. Mrs. Carter nodded, producing her reservation details with calm precision. The hostess scanned her list and nodded, gesturing toward the dining room. "Right this way, ma'am." The journey to her table felt longer than it should have. Mrs. Carter's heels clicked softly against the polished hardwood floor as she followed the hostess. She noted the carefully arranged seating. Tables near the windows offered breathtaking views of the cityscape, while those near the center were positioned for optimal comfort. Yet, she was led to a table tucked near the kitchen entrance, a spot that lacked the charm and warmth of the rest of the restaurant. "Here you are," the hostess said, placing a menu before her and offering a brief, perfunctory smile. Mrs. Carter thanked her quietly, her tone devoid of complaint, and settled into her seat. The faint hum of kitchen activity buzzed behind her, but she paid it no mind. Her eyes scanned the restaurant, taking in the impeccably dressed waitstaff, the glittering chandeliers, and the diners engrossed in their meals. She appeared serene. Yet there was an alertness in her gaze, as though she were quietly assessing the environment. Minutes turned into a quarter of an hour, and Mrs. Carter noticed a curious pattern. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, delivering plates of artful cuisine and refilling glasses with practiced ease. Yet none paused at her table. She watched as the nearby guests received their entrees, their laughter and conversations uninterrupted by the occasional glance in her direction. Her calm expression remained, but inwardly, she began to observe the subtleties of the service, or lack thereof. A young couple seated not far from her whispered to each other, their eyes flicking toward her table with curiosity and perhaps a hint of unease. Finally, she caught sight of a waiter approaching, his name tag reading Ryan. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with neatly combed hair and a crisp uniform. Ryan was jovial as he attended to a table of 4, laughing at a joke one of the diners told and promising to return with a bottle of their finest wine. But as he passed Mrs. Carter's table, his demeanor shifted. His smile faded slightly, and he avoided eye contact, walking by as though her table were invisible. Mrs. Carter's gaze followed him, her composed expression betraying none of her thoughts. She adjusted her napkin, sitting a little straighter. Another 10 minutes passed, and still no one came to her table. From across the room, Jackson Carter observed everything. Seated in a discreet corner, he watched as his mother's quiet dignity was met with blatant neglect. His jaw tightened as he saw Ryan once again bypass her table, this time chatting animatedly with another party. Jackson had built Viridian's Table with the vision of it being an oasis of inclusivity and respect, and witnessing this scene felt like a personal affront. Still, Jackson held his composure, his sharp mind calculating the best course of action. He wanted to see how far this would go, how much disrespect Ryan would dare show before stepping in. Patience was a virtue his mother had instilled in him, and tonight it would serve as his weapon. Unbeknownst to Ryan, the evening's events were already set in motion. As the clock ticked past the 30-minute mark, Mrs. Carter's patience, though vast, began to wear thin. Her composure remained impeccable, hands folded neatly on the edge of the table, her back straight, her gaze steady. Yet, there was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a quiet resolve taking hold. The atmosphere around her seemed charged, as if the growing unease among the other diners mirrored the weight of her silence. Finally, Ryan, whose name Carter had overheard in passing, strode toward her table. His steps were quick, almost perfunctory, his demeanor noticeably less vibrant than when he interacted with other guests. As he approached, she observed the faint tension in his expression, the forced pleasantness that barely masked his reluctance. "Sorry for the delay, ma'am," Ryan said briskly, barely meeting her gaze as he adjusted his name tag. "We're a little short-staffed tonight. What can I get you?" Mrs. Carter looked at him, her calm eyes searching his face. She noticed the hurried tone, the absence of genuine courtesy, and the slight fidgeting of his hands. Nevertheless, she offered him a polite smile. "I'd like to start with a glass of water, please," she said, her voice warm but firm. Ryan nodded curtly, scribbling on his notepad as if writing down something monumental. "Sure thing. I'll be back in a moment." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the flow of waitstaff moving through the dining room. Mrs. Carter waited, her gaze following him as he stopped at another table to chat animatedly with a group of diners. The glass of water never came. Meanwhile, whispers began to ripple through the restaurant. A woman at the adjacent table leaned over to her companion, murmuring, "Why hasn't she been served yet? It's been ages." A man across the room glanced at Mrs. Carter, his brow furrowed, as he observed the waiter's repeated negligence. Jackson, seated at his corner table, watched it all unfold with growing discontent. Every slight against his mother was like a strike to his own sense of justice. He saw how Ryan, now laughing with another party, completely ignored her table yet again. It was time to intervene. Jackson Carter was not a man who acted without thought. As a restaurateur and businessman, he understood the value of measured actions over rash decisions. Tonight, however, the restraint he was known for was being tested to its limits. From his vantage point, Jackson could see his mother's enduring poise as she sat alone, the only table in the restaurant that had yet to be properly attended to. Her resilience in the face of this quiet injustice made his chest tighten with both admiration and anger. He had learned much of his strength from her, and now, seeing her treated with such indifference, he felt the weight of his duty as both her son and the owner of this establishment. He scanned the room, taking in the reactions of the other patrons. There was an undercurrent of unease, furtive glances, whispers, and raised eyebrows, as people began to notice the disparity in treatment. Jackson's eyes narrowed as he focused on Ryan, who was now taking an order from a couple seated at the restaurant's prime window spot. Ryan's cheerful demeanor seemed to mock the seriousness of the moment. Jackson's mind raced. He could storm over and confront Ryan, make a scene that would undoubtedly leave an impression. But his mother had always taught him that timing and approach mattered as much as the action itself. So he waited, his hands clasped tightly together on the table, his eyes never leaving Ryan. As Ryan breezed past Mrs. Carter's table again without so much as a glance, she raised her hand slightly, signaling for his attention. Ryan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then continued walking. Jackson's jaw clenched. The time for waiting was drawing to a close. He stood, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure as he moved toward the center of the dining room. The air seemed to shift as Jackson's purposeful strides carried him closer to his mother's table. Though he exuded calm, there was a fire in his eyes that hinted at the storm brewing within. Ryan, oblivious to the mounting tension, laughed at another table, completely unaware that the owner of Viridian's table was about to make himself known. As Jackson approached, the room seemed to grow quieter, the lively hum of conversation ebbing away. Patrons noticed the change in atmosphere, their curiosity drawn to the man moving with quiet authority. Mrs. Carter, ever perceptive, glanced up and met her son's gaze. His expression was calm but resolute, and she knew he was ready to act. Ryan, still oblivious, laughed heartily at a joke shared by a table of regulars. His relaxed demeanor was in sharp contrast to the simmering tension that had settled over the room. A young couple nearby exchanged uneasy glances, their attention shifting between Ryan's indifference and Mrs. Carter's composed presence. Jackson stopped a few feet away from his mother's table, taking a moment to assess the scene. Ryan's neglect had been blatant, and the discomfort it caused was now palpable among the diners. Even Dana, the manager, stood at the bar, Her brow furrowed as she seemed to sense the unrest. Mrs. Carter watched her son, a faint smile playing at her lips. She recognized the look in his eyes, a mix of protective instinct and unwavering determination. She had seen it many times before, particularly when he was standing up for something he believed in. Tonight, it was clear he would not allow this slight to go unanswered. Jackson turned toward Ryan, his voice cutting through the subdued noise like a blade. "Excuse me, Ryan," he said, his tone calm yet commanding. Ryan froze mid-laugh, his head snapping toward the sound of his name. His eyes widened as he saw Jackson standing there, his presence radiating authority. For a moment, Ryan seemed unsure of what to do, his confusion evident as he stammered. Yes, sir? Can I help you?" "You've had multiple chances to help already," Jackson replied evenly, his gaze steady. "But it seems you've chosen not to. Let's have a word." The dining room fell into a hush, the diner's attention fully captured by the unfolding confrontation. Even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the doors, their curiosity piqued. Ryan, now visibly nervous, nodded and followed Jackson toward a quieter corner of the room. Mrs. Carter remained seated, her expression calm but watchful. She trusted her son to handle the situation with the dignity and fairness she had instilled in him, but she also knew this was not merely about her. It was about setting a standard for everyone under his leadership. In the corner of the restaurant, away from the prying eyes of the diners, Jackson turned to face Ryan. The young waiter fidgeted with the edge of his apron, his earlier confidence now entirely replaced by unease. "Do you know who that woman is?" Jackson asked, his voice low but firm. Ryan hesitated, glancing toward Mrs. Carter. I mean, no, not exactly. She's a guest, right?" "She's not just a guest," Jackson said, his tone sharp enough to make Ryan flinch. "She's my mother. The woman you've been ignoring for the better part of an hour is the reason I'm standing here today. She's also the reason this restaurant even exists." Ryan's face turned pale, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. I didn't mean to." "Stop," Jackson interrupted, his voice calm but cutting. "This isn't about your intentions. It's about your actions. You treated her with disrespect while going out of your way to serve others. You made her feel like she didn't belong here, in a restaurant she helped inspire." Ryan opened his mouth to protest, but thought better of it. The weight of Jackson's words settled heavily on his shoulders. Jackson continued, his voice softening slightly. "This isn't just about my mother. It's about every guest who walks through those doors. They deserve respect and fairness, regardless of who they are or what you think of them. That's the standard we set here. And tonight, you failed to meet it." Ryan hung his head, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," he mumbled. "Apologies are a start, but they're not enough," Jackson said firmly. "You're dismissed for the night. Go home and reflect on what happened here. When you're ready to take accountability and demonstrate that you've learned from this, we'll talk about whether there's still a place for you on this team." Ryan nodded silently and walked away, his steps heavy with shame. Jackson took a deep breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He returned to his mother's table, where she greeted him with a warm smile. "You handled that well," Mrs. Carter said softly. "Thanks, Mom," Jackson replied, his voice filled with both relief and resolve. "Now, let's make sure you have the evening you deserve." Jackson signaled Dana, the restaurant manager, to join him at Mrs. Carter's table. Dana, who had been observing the events unfold with increasing unease, hurried over, her expression a mix of concern and regret. "Dana," Jackson began, his voice steady but firm, "I trust you to ensure my mother's experience tonight is nothing short of exceptional." Dana nodded quickly, her professionalism returning despite the tension in the air. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Mrs. Carter, please allow me to personally attend to your table. I deeply apologize for the way you've been treated tonight. It's unacceptable, and I'll do everything to make it right." Mrs. Carter smiled graciously, her calm demeanor intact. "Thank you, Dana. I trust that this will be a learning experience for everyone involved." Dana immediately took over, pouring Mrs. Carter a glass of water and presenting the menu with an added flourish. She explained the evening's specials with genuine warmth, eager to erase the unpleasant memory left by Ryan's behavior. Meanwhile, Jackson remained at the table, his presence a silent assurance that everything would be handled with the utmost care. As Dana moved away to place the order, other patrons watched the scene with quiet admiration. The air of discomfort that had lingered was beginning to lift, replaced by a sense of respect for both misses. Carter's composure and Jackson's decisive leadership. Jackson leaned toward his mother. "Are you okay? I hate that you had to go through that." Mrs. Carter placed a hand over his, her smile soft and reassuring. "I'm fine, Jackson. Sometimes situations like this remind us of the work still to be done. You handled it the right way. Now, let's enjoy the rest of the evening." As the meal progressed, Dana ensured that every detail of Mrs. Carter's dining experience was impeccable. From the perfectly plated appetizers to the attentive service, it was clear that the staff, inspired by Jackson's example, were eager to show they could uphold the restaurant's values. As the evening wound down, Jackson gathered the staff for a brief meeting. Mrs. Carter had left, but not before offering Dana a few kind words and a smile that conveyed her approval. Now, Jackson stood in the kitchen, his team assembled before him. The weight of the night's events hung in the air, but Jackson's expression was one of calm determination. "Tonight was a reminder," Jackson began, his voice carrying a quiet authority, "that this restaurant isn't just about serving food. It's about creating an experience where every person who walks through those doors feels valued and respected. That didn't happen tonight, and it's unacceptable." The staff shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Dana, standing to the side, looked at Jackson with a mixture of gratitude and respect. "What happened tonight wasn't just a failure of one person," Jackson continued, his gaze sweeping over the team. "It was a failure of our culture. We can't let assumptions or biases dictate how we treat people. That goes against everything this restaurant stands for." He paused, letting his words sink in before adding, "Moving forward, we're going to do better. Dana and I will be implementing training sessions to reinforce what we value here: respect, inclusivity, and professionalism. If you're not willing to embrace those values, this may not be the place for you." The room was silent, but the tension was replaced by a sense of resolve. The staff members nodded, some murmuring their agreement. "Let tonight be a turning point," Jackson concluded. "We're not just here to serve food. We're here to make people feel welcome, no matter who they are. Let's remember that." As the team dispersed, Dana approached Jackson. "That was well said," she remarked. Jackson nodded. "Thanks. It's not just about setting an example. It's about making sure this place reflects what we believe in, every day." Outside the restaurant, Jackson stepped into the crisp night air, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He knew the evening had been challenging, but it had also been an opportunity to reaffirm the values he and his mother held dear. The next morning, Jackson sat in his office, replaying the events of the previous evening in his mind. He had barely slept, his thoughts consumed with the lessons it had offered. While Ryan's actions had been disheartening, the opportunity to address the deeper issues within his restaurant's culture felt like a pivotal moment. He picked up the phone and called his mother. "Good morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" "Good morning, Jackson. I did. Thank you. I hope you did too, though I suspect you've been overthinking as usual," Mrs. Carter replied, her tone teasing but warm. Jackson chuckled. "You know me too well. I couldn't stop thinking about last night and how we move forward from it." "You've already taken the first step, son," Mrs. Carter said. "Acknowledging the problem is important, but ensuring lasting change is even more crucial. This is about creating a space where kindness and respect aren't just expected, but celebrated." Her words stayed with Jackson as he began drafting a new initiative for the restaurant: the Carter Standard. This would be a comprehensive code of conduct and training program designed to instill a culture of respect and inclusion among the staff. He envisioned workshops, open discussions, and community involvement to ensure every employee understood the importance of their role in fostering a welcoming environment. By midday, Dana arrived at his office to discuss the plan. "I think this is exactly what we need," she said after reading the draft. "It's ambitious, but it reflects the values you and Mrs. Carter hold dear. I'm fully on board." "Good," Jackson replied, a sense of determination in his voice. "We're not just fixing what happened last night. We're building something better, something my mother can be proud of." Over the next few days, Jackson and Dana began implementing the plan. Posters displaying the Carter Standard were placed in the staff break room. The first of many training sessions was scheduled, and Jackson made it clear that he would personally lead these discussions to emphasize their importance. Weeks later, the restaurant buzzed with its usual energy, but there was something different in the air. The staff carried themselves with a newfound sense of pride and purpose. Guests who had been regulars for years noticed the shift, commenting on the warmth and attentiveness of the service. One evening, as Jackson made his rounds, he saw Ryan entering the restaurant. The former waiter, now looking humbled, approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Carter," Ryan began, his voice tinged with regret. "I wanted to apologize again for my behavior. I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I realize how wrong I was. If there's any way I can prove myself and earn back your trust, I'd be grateful for the opportunity." Jackson regarded him thoughtfully before replying. "Ryan, it takes courage to admit when you've made a mistake, but trust has to be rebuilt, not just asked for. If you're serious about making amends, I'll consider giving you another chance, but only under the condition that you fully commit to the Carter standard." Ryan nodded eagerly. "I will. Thank you, sir." Later that evening, Mrs. Carter visited the restaurant again, this time greeted with enthusiasm and genuine warmth by the staff. She smiled at her son as she walked in, taking in the positive energy that filled the space. "You've done well, Jackson," she said, her voice filled with pride. "I had a great example." He replied, his eyes reflecting his gratitude. As they shared a quiet dinner, Jackson felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The challenges of the past had led to meaningful growth, not just for the restaurant, but for everyone involved. It wasn't just about food or service anymore. It was about creating a legacy of dignity, respect, and kindness that would endure. The night ended with Mrs. Carter placing a hand on her son's. "This place isn't just your business, Jackson. It's your heart. And it shows." Jackson smiled, knowing that the journey they had undertaken together was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The transformation at Carter's Place became more than just a story of a single incident. It grew into a testament to the power of respect, empathy, and the willingness to change. Jackson's unwavering commitment to his values inspired not only his staff, but also his community, turning the restaurant into a beacon of excellence and inclusivity. Mrs. Carter's quiet strength and grace remained at the heart of it all, a reminder that true dignity lies in how we respond to adversity. As the restaurant flourished, its legacy became clear. Every guest, regardless of who they were, deserved to be treated with kindness and care. And so, Carter's Place stood not just as a luxurious dining establishment, but as a symbol of what can be achieved when people choose to rise above prejudice and embrace humanity. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a lesson in leadership, love, and the enduring impact of doing what is right. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story. We hope it touched your heart and inspired you as much as it did us. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt and inspiring content. Your support means the world to us and helps us create even more amazing stories to share with you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, take care and remember, kindness and respect can change lives. See you in the next video.